Before the donation center closed for the night, before the nurse noticed the color draining from her face, a small voice beside the metal chair asked a question that made the fluorescent lights feel suddenly too bright. "Mommy, does selling your blood hurt?" The woman in chair 7 opened her mouth to answer, but the second question came before she could speak. "And if you give too much, will you disappear like Daddy did?" In the back office, a phone was ringing. The call came from a private hospital 30 miles north, where a man who controlled 3 ports and half the shipping lanes on the eastern seaboard was bleeding out on a steel table. His blood type was O negative, the rarest kind, and the only donor who had given that type today was now sitting in a vinyl chair with a cotton ball taped to the inside of her elbow, holding her 6-year-old daughter and pretending she was not about to faint. She did not know that her blood would be in a helicopter within the hour. She did not know that it would save a man whose name made judges hesitate before speaking. But she would find out. Because men like Cormac Brannigan did not forget a debt. And he had never owed one this large. The Lifeline Donor Center sat at the corner of Morrow Avenue and 10th, in a part of Dunhaven that most people only drove through on their way to somewhere else. The building had once been a pharmacy, before that, a hardware store. Now it was a long, narrow room with tile floors the color of old teeth, 8 reclining chairs along the left wall, and a front desk where a woman named Patrice had worked for 19 years without ever once seeing the owner in person. The windows faced a laundromat that had closed 6 months ago. Cardboard covered the glass from inside. Someone had spray-painted a phone number across the cardboard, but half the digits had faded so no one ever called. Across the street, a check-cashing place sat beside a dollar store that always smelled of plastic and cleaning solution. The streetlights on this block flickered. The sidewalks had cracks wide enough to catch a heel. The bus stop bench had a missing slat, so people stood instead of sat, even when their legs were tired. It was the kind of neighborhood where people donated plasma not because they believed in helping others, but because $45 meant the light stayed on another week. It was the kind of place where mothers learned to say everything is fine in a voice so steady that even their own children almost believed it. Seren Caldwell had been donating every 14 days for the past 5 months. That was the maximum allowed. $45 per visit. $90 a month if she timed it right. It was not enough. It was never enough. But it was something. And something was the only currency she had left. She was 32 years old. Her hair was dark and pulled back with a cloth band she had made herself from an old headscarf, because hair ties cost money, and money was for rent and medicine and the electricity bill that was already 9 days overdue. Her cheekbones had become more visible over the past year. Not in the way magazines admired, but in the way that happened when meals became negotiations, and dinner often meant watching her daughter eat while pretending she had already had something earlier. Her eyes were the color of wet slate, and they carried the particular kind of exhaustion that could not be solved by sleep. The kind that came from being the only adult in a life that required at least 3. Her hands were steady. That was the one thing she could still say about herself. No matter how tired she became, no matter how many bills she juggled or how many collection calls she ignored, her hands stayed steady. It had been useful when she was a surgical technician at Mercy General. Before the accusation, before the investigation, before a stolen medication count and a coworker who needed a scapegoat and a system that found it easier to revoke her certification than to look closely at who was actually responsible. She had not worked in a hospital in 14 months. She had applied to 31 jobs since then. Retail, cleaning, warehouse, data entry, anything. Most never called back. 3 had interviewed her and then gone silent. 2 had offered positions and then rescinded them after the background check came through, because a revoked certification raised questions even when no charges had been filed. So now she cleaned office buildings at night. $11.25 an hour. 22 hours a week because the company kept everyone under the threshold that would require benefits. She did the math constantly. The math never worked. But she did it anyway, the way a person keeps checking a locked door, hoping it might somehow have opened on its own. Noah sat beside her in a plastic chair meant for adults. She was 6 years old. She had her mother's dark hair and her father's wide, curious eyes, and a way of watching the world that made Serene's chest ache because it reminded her so much of Brennan. Brennan, who had died 18 months ago. Not suddenly, slowly. A diagnosis at 30, a decline at 31, and a funeral at 32 that Serene had paid for with a credit card she was still trying to pay off. The disease was genetic. The doctors had been clear about that, which meant that every 6 months, Noah had to be tested. Blood work, imaging, consultations with a specialist whose office was 40 minutes away in a hospital that did not accept the state insurance Noah was currently on. The next round of tests was scheduled for November. Serene had $212 in her bank account. The tests would cost $1,100 out of pocket. She had not told anyone this. She had not told her landlord that rent would be late again. She had not told her daughter that the cereal they had been eating for breakfast 3 days in a row was not a fun choice, but a necessary one. She had not told anyone that some nights, after Noah was asleep, she sat at the kitchen table and stared at the numbers on the electric bill until the numbers blurred and her throat tightened, and she had to press her palms flat against the table just to keep from unraveling. But every morning, she woke up before her daughter. She made the bed. She combed Noah's hair and tied it with a ribbon she had bought for $1 at a church rummage sale. She walked her daughter to the bus stop and kissed her forehead and said, "I love you and have a good day, and I will be right here when you get home." And none of it was a lie. She meant every word. She simply left out the rest. 3 days ago, the letter had arrived. Serene had known what it was before she opened it. The envelope was from the Dunhaven Housing Authority. The paper inside was the kind of official that did not bend. It informed her that her landlord had filed for eviction proceedings, that she had 14 days to pay the outstanding balance of $1,940. That failure to comply would result in a court date and a sheriff's notice and a lock on the door of the only home her daughter had ever known. She had read it twice. Then she had folded it carefully and placed it inside the kitchen drawer beneath the phone book no one ever used. Then she had sat down at the table and pressed her hands flat against the wood and counted her breaths, the way the counselor at the free clinic had taught her to do during the months after Brennan died. In, hold, out. In, hold, out. It did not help. She had known the eviction was coming. She had been juggling for months, paying half the rent 1 month, promising the rest the next, falling further behind each time something unexpected appeared. A car repair, a school fee, the inhaler Noah needed when the autumn air turned cold and her lungs began to tighten the way they always did in October. But knowing something is coming and seeing it arrive are two different kinds of pain. That night, after Noah was asleep, Serene had opened her laptop and searched for options. Emergency rental assistance, waitlist full, church benevolence funds, applications closed until January, payday loans, interest rates that would bury her twice as deep. She had scrolled until her eyes burned and her coffee went cold, and the clock on the microwave said 2:17 in the morning. And then she had seen the blood center's website. She had donated before, many times, but she had always waited the full 14 days between visits because the nurses warned her about fatigue and low iron and the risks of giving too frequently when your body was already under strain. Her last donation had been 11 days ago. She had stared at the screen for a long time. $45 would not save her. It would not pay the rent. It would not stop the eviction. But it would buy groceries for the week. It would keep the lights on 3 more days. It would give her time to think of something else. And time was the only thing she could not afford to run out of. She had made the appointment for the following Tuesday. She had not eaten breakfast that morning, not because she forgot, but because there was only enough cereal for Noah, and Seren had learned months ago that hunger was easier to hide than a child asking why the box was empty. By the time she sat down in chair 7 at the donation center, her hands were shaking. Not visibly. Not enough for the intake nurse to notice, but she felt it. The slight tremor in her fingers as she squeezed the rubber ball they gave her. The way the room seemed to tilt half a degree to the left when she turned her head too quickly. She should not have been there. Her body was telling her to stop. But the letter was in the kitchen drawer, and the tests were in November. And her daughter was sitting in the plastic chair beside her, holding a picture book from the donation center's children's basket, asking questions that no 6-year-old should ever have to ask. So Seren squeezed the ball, and she watched her blood flow through the tube, and she told herself that this was what mothers did. They gave until there was nothing left. And then they found a way to give a little more. Noah turned a page in her picture book without reading it. She had been doing that for several minutes now, turning pages at intervals that were too regular, too mechanical, the way a child does when she is pretending to read, but actually listening to something else. Seren noticed. She always noticed. But she did not say anything because saying something would require an explanation, and explanations required energy she did not have. The donation was almost finished. The bag was nearly full. The nurse had said 5 more minutes, and Seren had nodded and leaned her head back against the vinyl chair and tried to breathe slowly enough to keep the room from spinning. Mommy. Seren opened her eyes. Noah was looking at her with an expression that did not belong on a 6-year-old's face. It was too still, too knowing. The kind of expression that came from watching and listening and understanding far more than any child should. Yes, baby. Is $45 a lot? Seren's stomach tightened. She forced a smile that she did not feel. Why do you ask? Because the lady at the desk said you get $45 for giving blood. And you come here every 2 weeks. So I did the math. That is $90 a month. And rent is more than $90. So I was wondering if maybe we need to come more often. The words hit Seren like a hand pressed flat against her chest. Not because they were wrong, but because they were right. Because her 6-year-old daughter had been sitting in this plastic chair, turning pages she was not reading, calculating their survival in numbers she should never have learned to count. You do not need to worry about rent, but I heard you on the phone. You said we might have to leave, and then you cried. You thought I was asleep, but I was not. The fluorescent lights above them buzzed. Somewhere across the room, another donor coughed. The intake nurse was typing something on her computer, not looking in their direction, not hearing any of this. Seren reached for her daughter's hand. Noah, listen to me. Whatever happens, you and I are going to be okay. Do you understand? Noah looked at her mother's arm, at the tube, at the blood flowing out of her body and into a plastic bag that would be sent somewhere far away. Does giving blood make you tired? A little. Is that why you do not eat breakfast anymore? The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Seren had not realized Noah had noticed. She had been so careful. Pouring the cereal into Noah's bowl, pretending to eat something at the counter while her daughter focused on her food. Saying she had already eaten before Noah woke up. But children see everything. They see the cupboards getting emptier. They see the mail that makes their mother cry. They see the way she looks at the gas gauge before deciding whether to drive or walk. They see the way she flinches when the phone rings, and the way she counts coins at the register, and the way she says, "We are fine," in a voice that has stopped meaning anything at all. I eat, baby. I promise. Noah looked at her for a long moment. Then she said something that Seren would remember for the rest of her life. You always make sure I have enough. But nobody makes sure you have enough. That is not fair, Mommy. Somebody should take care of you too. And Seren could not speak. She pulled Noah close and pressed her lips to the top of her daughter's head and held her there in the humming fluorescent light of a blood donation center on Morrow Avenue, while a bag filled with the only thing she had left to give, and the clock on the wall moved forward, indifferent to everything it witnessed. 40 minutes later, the helicopter landed on the roof of Crestmore Private Hospital. Seren did not know this. She was already on the bus by then, holding Noah's hand, watching the streetlights blur past the window and trying not to think about how dizzy she still felt. But the blood arrived. It was matched. It was transfused. And by midnight, a man who had been dying was no longer dying. His name was Cormac Brannigan, and he was not the kind of man who forgot. Cormac Brannigan opened his eyes at 6:14 in the morning. The hospital room was private, corner suite, 8th floor. The kind of room that did not appear on any public directory, the kind that was accessed by a separate elevator and protected by two men in plain clothes who stood at the end of the hallway and did not speak to anyone who did not already know why they were there. The surgeon had called it a miracle. The internal bleeding had been catastrophic. The liver laceration alone should have killed him. But the blood had arrived in time. 4 units. O negative. The rarest type. Matched and transfused within an hour of his arrival. Someone out there had saved his life. Cormac did not believe in fate. He did not believe in luck. He believed in leverage and information and the careful application of pressure at precisely the right points. He believed that every transaction had a price, and that debts unpaid were weaknesses waiting to be exploited, which meant that whoever had given that blood was now owed something, and Cormac Brannigan paid his debts. He was 58 years old. His hair had gone silver at the temples but remained dark everywhere else, cut short in a style that had not changed in 30 years. His face was lined in ways that suggested weather rather than age. Hard years, outdoor years, years spent on docks and in warehouses and in rooms where decisions were made that never appeared in any official record. He had built his organization from nothing. A longshoreman's son from the Cobb Hill tenements who had learned early that the world did not give. It only took. And if you wanted anything at all, you had to take it first and hold it with both hands and never let anyone see you flinch. His reputation was precise. He did not threaten. He did not bluster. He simply made things happen, quietly, efficiently, in ways that left no fingerprints and no recourse. Judges consulted him before making decisions that might affect his interests. Developers sought his approval before breaking ground in certain districts. The police commissioner had his private number and used it only when absolutely necessary. But reputation was not the same as identity. The men who worked for him saw the surface, the control, the discipline, the way he could sit in a room full of tension and never once raise his voice. They assumed he had always been this way. They assumed the coldness went all the way down. They were wrong. Cormac had been a boy once. A boy named Cormac who shared a mattress with his younger sister in a 2-room apartment where the radiator never worked, and the walls were thin enough to hear everything that happened next door. A boy who watched his mother count pennies at the kitchen table while his father drank at a bar 3 blocks away, spending money they did not have on a thirst he could not control. His mother's name had been Orla. She had worked at a cannery until her hands bled from the cold. She had taken in laundry on weekends. She had sold her wedding ring when Cormac was 11 to pay for medicine when his sister caught pneumonia, and she had never once complained. She had also donated blood. Every 2 weeks. At a clinic on the south side of Cobb Hill. For the same reason the woman in Dunhaven had done it. Because $45 meant the lights stayed on. Because $45 meant food on the table. Because $45 was the difference between holding on and letting go. Cormac remembered sitting beside her in a plastic chair, too young to understand what was happening, but old enough to sense that it cost her something, He remembered her hands trembling afterward. He remembered the way she leaned against him on the bus ride home, not because she wanted to be close, but because she could not sit upright on her own. He remembered asking her once if it hurt. She had smiled at him with the kind of smile that mothers give when they are lying for the right reasons. "Not at all," she had said. "It is just a small thing. A small thing that helps." She had died when Cormac was 16, not from the donations, from exhaustion, from a body that had been asked to carry too much for too many years, from a heart that had simply forgotten how to keep beating. He had stood beside her bed at the county hospital and held her hand while she stopped breathing, and he had made a promise to himself in that moment. A promise that he would never be powerless again, that he would never watch someone he owed disappear while he stood there unable to do anything at all. That was 42 years ago. He had not thought about his mother's blood donations in decades. But lying in this private room, alive because a stranger had given something she probably could not afford to give, the memory returned with a clarity that made his chest tighten. He pressed the call button beside his bed. A man appeared in the doorway within seconds. Tall, lean, gray suit. This was Devlin, his most trusted associate, the man who handled things that required discretion and thoroughness in equal measure. "The blood," Cormac said. His voice was hoarse from the intubation, but the authority in it had not diminished. "Find out where it came from. I want a name. I want an address. I want everything." Devlin nodded once and disappeared. By noon, Cormac had a file. By evening, he had read it 3 times. And by sunrise the following morning, he was standing outside a second-floor apartment in Dunhaven, wearing a coat that cost more than the building's monthly rent, looking at a door with a faded number 7 and a welcome mat that said, "Bless this home." He knocked twice. And inside the apartment, a woman who had given blood to stay alive was about to discover that the blood had done something far more dangerous. It had made Cormac Brannigan feel indebted. Seren was standing at the kitchen counter when the knock came. She had been staring at the coffee maker, waiting for it to finish, not because she wanted coffee, but because watching the slow drip gave her something to focus on besides the numbers in her head. $1,940, 14 days. $1,100 for the tests in November. $212 in the account. The math never stopped. It played on a loop behind her eyes like a song she could not turn off. Noah was at school. The apartment was quiet. The knock was loud. Seren froze. She was not expecting anyone. She never had visitors. The only people who knocked on her door were the landlord, who had stopped coming in person after their last conversation ended with Seren in tears, and the delivery drivers who sometimes got the wrong apartment number. This knock was different. It was unhurried. Patient. The knock of someone who was not going anywhere. She wiped her hands on the dish towel beside the sink and walked to the door. She looked through the peephole. A man stood in the hallway, silver at the temples, dark coat, face like something carved from old wood. He was alone, but he did not look like a man who was ever truly alone. He looked like the kind of man who had other men waiting just out of sight. Seren's pulse quickened. She did not open the door. "Who is it?" "My name is Cormac Brannigan. I am not here to cause you trouble. I would like to speak with you for a few minutes. That is all." The name meant nothing to her, but the voice did something. It was low and controlled and carried the kind of authority that came not from volume but from certainty. The certainty of a man who was used to being listened to. "I do not know you." "No, but you saved my life 2 days ago, and I came to say thank you." Seren blinked. Her hand stayed on the deadbolt. "I do not understand." "The blood you donated on Tuesday evening. It was transported to a hospital 30 miles north. It was transfused into my body. Without it, I would have died." The words did not make sense. Seren had donated blood dozens of times. She had never once thought about where it went. She had never once imagined that the $45 and the cotton ball taped to her elbow and the dizziness on the bus ride home had anything to do with a man in a dark coat standing outside her door. I just needed the money. I know. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of something. A weight. A shift. The kind of silence that happens when two strangers realize they are no longer strangers in the usual sense. Seren opened the door. She did not know why. Later, she would tell herself that it was because she had nothing left to steal, that the apartment held nothing of value, that she was too tired to be afraid of anything that was not a bill or a court summons or a phone call about her daughter's test results. But that was not the whole truth. The truth was that she saw something in his face when she opened the door. Something behind the control, something that looked almost like recognition. He did not step inside immediately. He stood at the threshold with his hands visible at his sides, the way a person does when they want you to know they are not armed. His eyes moved across her face, and she had the uncomfortable sense that he was reading her the way she read the fine print on collection notices. Every detail, every line, every piece of information she would rather have kept hidden. You have not been sleeping. It was not a question. Seren felt her jaw tighten. That is none of your concern. No, it is not. But it is true. He glanced past her into the apartment. She saw his gaze register the sparse furniture, the stack of unopened mail on the counter, the empty fruit bowl, the way the sunlight fell across a floor that was clean but worn. May I come in? Why? Because I owe you a debt. And I would like to understand what it will take to repay it. Seren almost laughed. It came out as something closer to a breath. I do not need charity. I am not offering charity. Charity is what people give when they want to feel better about themselves. This is something else. What is it then? Cormac met her eyes. His expression did not change, but something in it shifted. The way ice shifts when weight is placed upon it. Invisible unless you know what to listen for. This is a debt, and I pay my debts. He said it simply, without drama, without embellishment. And somehow that made it more convincing than any speech could have been. Seren stepped aside. He entered the apartment and stood in the center of the living room without sitting down. He looked at the photographs on the wall. Seren and Noah at a park. Noah on her first day of kindergarten. Brennan holding Noah as an infant, his smile wide, his eyes already showing the first signs of the fatigue that would later be diagnosed as something far worse. Your husband. He passed away. 18 months ago. Cormac nodded once. He did not say he was sorry. He did not offer condolences. He simply looked at the photograph with an expression that suggested he understood what it meant to lose someone and had long ago stopped pretending that words could fill the space they left behind. And now it is just you and the girl. Her name is Noah. Noah. Cormac repeated the name as if memorizing it. How old? 6. He turned to face Seren. His eyes were gray-green, the color of a winter sea. Tell me what you need. I do not need anything. That is a lie. And we both know it. So let me ask again. Tell me what you need. The directness should have offended her. It should have made her defensive. But it did the opposite. It cracked something open. Because Seren had spent so many months pretending. So many months saying she was fine, and she would figure it out, and she did not need help. And here was a man who looked at her and saw through every word. She sat down on the edge of the couch. She did not realize she was shaking until she looked at her hands. And she told him. She told him about Brennan. About meeting him in college. About the way he laughed at his own jokes before anyone else could. About the wedding in his parents' backyard with folding chairs and string lights, and a cake his sister had made from a box mix because they could not afford a bakery. She told him about the diagnosis. The word Brennan had never wanted to say out loud. Huntington's. The genetic lottery that no one won. The slow unraveling of motor control and cognition, and eventually everything that made a person who they were. She told him about the insurance company, the pre-existing condition clause that voided the policy 3 months after the diagnosis, the medical bills that arrived like a tide, the way she had watched their savings evaporate in a single year, then watched the debt begin to climb, then watched her husband become someone she had to carry to the bathroom because his legs no longer remembered how to walk. She told him about the funeral, the credit card, the interest rate that turned $1,800 into $4,000 in less than a year. She told him about her job, the accusation, the coworker who had been stealing medication for months and needed someone to blame when the count came up short. The investigation that had found no evidence against Seren but revoked her certification anyway because the hospital did not want the liability. The reference calls that never came. The interviews that ended in silence. The slow realization that her career was over and no one was going to tell her why. She told him about the night shifts cleaning office buildings, the $11.25 an hour, the bus rides in the dark, the mornings when she got home just before Noah woke up and pretended she had been there all along. She told him about the eviction notice, the 14 days, the $1,940 she did not have, and then she told him about Noah, about the tests, the genetic screening, the 50% chance that Huntington's had been passed down. The doctor who explained in careful, measured tones that early detection could help with planning but could not change the outcome. The appointments that cost money, the imaging that cost more. The specialist who did not take her insurance and would not negotiate. She told him about the next round of tests in November. The $1,100. The appointment she had already made because canceling would mean waiting another 4 months, and 4 months was too long to live without knowing. She told him about the blood donations, the $45, the way she had started going every 14 days because it was the only income she could control, the way she had gone 3 days early last Tuesday because the eviction notice had arrived and she was desperate and her body had paid the price. She told him about the dizziness, the way the room had tilted, the way Noah had asked if giving too much blood would make her disappear. And then she stopped. She had not meant to say any of it. She had not said most of it to anyone, not to the intake workers at the rental assistance office, not to the counselor at the free clinic, not to her own reflection in the bathroom mirror at 2 in the morning when the silence was so loud she could hear her own heartbeat. But this man had asked, and something about the way he asked, something about the way he stood there without pity, without judgment, without any of the performative concern she had learned to recognize and resent, had made her answer. The apartment was quiet. Cormac had not moved. He had not interrupted. He had stood by the window with his hands in his coat pockets and listened to every word as if listening were a skill he had spent decades refining. When Seren finished, she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and looked at the floor. I do not know why I told you any of that. Because you needed someone to hear it. She looked up at him. His face had not softened. It was not the face of a man who softened, but there was something in his eyes that had not been there when he walked in. Recognition. She had seen it before. In the eyes of other mothers at the free clinic. In the eyes of the woman at the food bank who always gave her an extra box of cereal without asking. In the eyes of anyone who had ever been pressed flat by circumstances they did not choose and did not deserve. Cormac reached into his coat and pulled out a phone. He dialed a number and waited. Devlin. I need 3 things. First, contact Aldrin and Howe. I want their best attorney on a wrongful termination case, employment law, medical sector. Have them call this number within the hour. He recited Seren's phone number without asking for it. Second, find out who manages the rental properties on Morrow Avenue in Dunhaven. I want the eviction filing withdrawn by end of business today. Third, get me the name of the best pediatric geneticist in the state, private practice, someone who takes complex cases. He hung up. Seren stared at him. Why are you doing this? I told you. You saved my life. I pay my debts. This is not a debt. This is. She stopped. She did not have a word for what it was. This is what should happen, Cormac said. This is what should happen when someone gives the only thing they have left to a stranger. Someone should notice. Someone should act. And if I have the power to act, then I will. You do not know me. I know enough. You know nothing. You know that I gave blood. That is all. Cormac looked at her for a long moment. His jaw tightened. His hands, still at his sides, closed slowly into fists and then opened again. I recognize that weight. I carried it beside my mother for 16 years. She fought alone. The world walked past her every single day. So she kept giving until there was nothing left. And then, she was gone. The words hung in the air. Serene's hands were trembling again. She pressed them against her knees to still them. What happened to her? Cormac turned toward the window. The light fell across his face in a way that made the lines around his eyes look deeper. She died when I was 16. She had worked 3 jobs for years. She donated blood every 2 weeks because we needed the money. She never complained, never stopped, never asked for anything. And one morning, she did not wake up. He turned back to Seren. The doctors said her heart gave out, but I knew the truth. Her heart did not give out. It was taken, piece by piece, by a world that saw a woman struggling and decided it was easier to look away. His voice did not break. It did not waver. But something underneath it shifted. The surface held, but the water beneath was moving. I made a promise to myself that day, that if I ever had the power to help someone like her, I would not look away. I would not wait for someone else to do it. I would act. He looked at Seren. You are not her, but you are standing where she stood. And I am not the boy I was then. I have resources. I have reach. And I am choosing to use them. Seren's voice came out as a whisper. You cannot save everyone. No, I cannot. But I can save you. The silence that followed had weight to it. The weight of words that cost something to speak. The weight of a door opened that had been sealed for decades. Seren looked at this man. This stranger who had walked into her apartment and listened to her story and made phone calls that would change her life. She had spent 14 months learning to distrust help, learning that assistance came with strings, that kindness often hid expectation, that the world was full of people who wanted to feel good about themselves and would disappear the moment things became complicated. But Cormac had not offered her hope. He had not promised that everything would be fine. He had simply looked at her situation and begun to dismantle it, piece by piece, with the efficiency of a man who had spent his entire life solving problems that other people considered unsolvable. Why me? The question came out before she could stop it. Cormac tilted his head slightly. What do you mean? You said you cannot save everyone. So why me? Why this apartment? Why today? There are thousands of people in this city who are struggling, millions in this country. You cannot help all of them. So what makes me different? Cormac was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was lower. Because your blood is in my veins. Because I am alive right now because you sat in a chair when your body was telling you to stop. Because your daughter asked if you would disappear, and you did not have an answer. And I heard that question echo in my own chest from 42 years ago. He stepped closer. Not threatening, not aggressive, just closer. I cannot undo what happened to my mother. I cannot go back to that apartment in Cobb Hill and tell her to rest. I cannot make the world see her before it was too late. But I can stand in this room, and I can look at you, and I can do what no one did for her. Seren felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She did not wipe them away. What if it does not work? What if the lawyers cannot clear my name? What if the eviction goes through anyway? What if Noah's tests? She could not finish the sentence. Then we deal with that when it comes. Cormac's voice was steady. But we do not stop. We do not give up. And you do not face it alone. That is the difference. That is what I am offering. Not a miracle. Not a guarantee. Just the promise that you will not carry this weight by yourself anymore. He reached into his coat again and pulled out a card. Plain white. A phone number printed in simple black letters. Nothing else. This is my direct line. It is answered at any hour. If something happens, if you need something, if the walls start closing in, you call. Seren took the card. Her fingers were trembling. I do not know how to thank you. Cormac shook his head. Do not thank me. I am not doing this for gratitude. I am doing this because it is right. And because somewhere out there is a little girl who will grow up without watching her mother work herself to death. And that is worth more than any thanks you could give. He moved toward the door. The attorney will call within the hour. The eviction will be handled by tonight. The geneticist will contact you tomorrow to schedule Noah's tests. There will be no bill. He opened the door and paused. Take care of your daughter, Seren, and let someone take care of you. Then he walked into the hallway and was gone. The phone rang at 11:47. Seren answered it with hands that had finally stopped shaking. The voice on the other end was brisk and professional. A woman named Marguerite Fenn from Aldrin and Howe. She explained that she specialized in wrongful termination cases involving medical professionals. She had reviewed the preliminary information provided by Mr. Brannigan's associate. She believed there was a strong case for reinstatement of Seren's certification and potential damages from the hospital. She asked questions. Seren answered them. The conversation lasted 34 minutes. By the end of it, Marguerite had scheduled an in-person meeting for the following Monday. She had requested copies of all documentation related to the investigation, and she had said something that Seren had not heard in 14 months. This was not your fault, and we are going to prove it. When the call ended, Seren sat on the couch and stared at the phone in her hand. She did not cry. She had cried enough for one day. Instead, she felt something she had almost forgotten existed. Space. For the first time in months, the walls of her apartment did not feel like they were pressing inward. The numbers in her head did not loop endlessly. The weight on her chest lifted just enough for her to take a full breath. She picked up Noah from school that afternoon. They walked home together, holding hands, and Noah talked about a drawing she had made in art class and a boy named Marcus who had shared his crackers with her at lunch. Seren listened. Really listened. Not with the distracted half-attention of a mother whose mind was somewhere else, but with the full presence of someone who had been given permission to exist in the moment. That evening, there was a knock at the door. Seren opened it to find a man in a gray suit holding 2 bags of groceries. He introduced himself as Devlin. He said Mr. Brannigan had asked him to deliver a few things. The bags contained milk, bread, eggs, fruit, vegetables, pasta, chicken, cereal, and a small box of chocolate cookies with a note tucked inside. The note had 2 words in precise handwriting. For Noah. Seren put the groceries away. She made dinner. Real dinner. Pasta with sauce made from actual tomatoes. Chicken that was not from a can. A salad with lettuce that was not wilting at the edges. Noah ate 3 helpings. Mommy, this is the best dinner ever. Seren smiled. A real smile. The kind she had almost forgotten how to make. That night, after Noah was asleep, Seren locked the front door. She checked the deadbolt. She stood in the silence of her apartment and listened to the sound of her daughter's breathing from the bedroom. And she realized something. For 14 months, she had been surviving, getting through each day, holding on with fingernails that were worn to the quick. She had forgotten what it felt like to imagine a future. But tonight, standing in the quiet dark with the groceries put away, and the attorney's number saved in her phone, and the geneticist's appointment scheduled for next week, she could imagine it. Not a perfect future, Not a guaranteed one, but a possible one, and possible was enough. The eviction filing was withdrawn the following morning. Seren received a call from the building management company at 9:15. A woman with a nervous voice explained that there had been an administrative error, that the outstanding balance had been addressed, that Seren's lease would be extended for an additional 12 months at the current rate, with no penalty for the prior missed payments. The woman did not explain how the balance had been addressed. She did not explain why the management company had suddenly become so accommodating. She simply apologized for any inconvenience and wished Seren a pleasant day. Seren hung up and sat down at the kitchen table. She stared at the eviction notice still sitting in the drawer. Then she took it out, folded it once, and dropped it in the trash. The following Monday, she met with Marguerite Fenn. The attorney's office was on the 14th floor of a glass tower downtown. The kind of building Seren had only ever seen from the outside. The kind of building where the elevators played soft music and the receptionists offered sparkling water in glasses that did not have fingerprints on them. Marguerite was in her 50s. Sharp eyes, gray hair cut short. She wore a blazer the color of charcoal and spoke in sentences that had no unnecessary words. She reviewed the documentation. She asked more questions. She made notes on a legal pad with handwriting so precise it looked printed. Then she looked up. The hospital violated 3 separate procedural requirements during the investigation. They failed to provide you with access to the evidence against you. They denied your request for union representation during the interview. And they accepted the accusation of a single coworker without conducting an independent audit of the medication inventory. Seren blinked. No one had ever explained it to her that way. What does that mean? It means they were sloppy. It means they wanted a quick resolution and they sacrificed your career to get it. It means we have grounds for a formal appeal to the state licensing board, a civil suit against the hospital for wrongful termination, and a potential defamation claim against the coworker who made the original accusation. Marguerite leaned forward. I cannot promise you will get your job back. The medical field is unforgiving, and these cases take time. But I can promise you that by the time we are finished, everyone involved will understand exactly what they did to you, and the record will reflect the truth. It was more than Seren had ever hoped for. 2 weeks later, the state licensing board agreed to reopen her case. 4 weeks after that, the hospital's legal team reached out to discuss a settlement. Seren did not accept the first offer. Or the second. Marguerite advised patience. Marguerite advised pressure. Marguerite advised letting them understand that this was not going away. The third offer included full reinstatement of Seren's certification, a written apology from the hospital administration, removal of all negative references from her employment file, and a settlement of $92,000 for lost wages and emotional distress. Seren accepted. She signed the papers in Marguerite's office on a Tuesday afternoon in late November. The same day Noah had her genetic screening appointment. The geneticist was named Dr. Amara Okonkwo. She had a calm voice and kind eyes, and a way of explaining complicated medical information that made it feel less terrifying. She ran the tests. She reviewed the imaging. She sat with Seren in her office afterward and delivered the results. Noah did not carry the gene. The 50% chance had landed in their favor. The genetic lottery that had taken Brennan had not touched their daughter. Noah would not develop Huntington's. Noah would not spend her 30s losing control of her body. Noah would grow up and live a full life and never have to wonder if every stumble or forgotten word was the beginning of the end. Seren did not remember leaving the doctor's office. She did not remember the elevator ride down or the walk to the car or the drive home. She only remembered standing in the parking lot of their apartment building, looking up at the window of their unit, and crying so hard that a passing neighbor asked if she needed help. She did not need help. For the first time in years, she did not need help. But she had accepted it anyway, and that had made all the difference. 6 months later, on a warm April afternoon, when the trees along Morrow Avenue had finally started to bloom, Seren walked into the Lifeline Donor Center with Noah at her side. She was not there to donate. She was there to say, "Thank you." Patrice was still behind the front desk, the same woman who had processed Seren's donations for 5 months. She looked up when they walked in, and her face changed. "Well, look at you! You look different." Seren smiled. "I feel different." She handed Patrice a small envelope. Inside was a check for $2,000, made out to the center's emergency fund, the fund that helped cover transportation costs for donors who could not afford the bus fare to get there. Patrice looked at the check. Then she looked at Seren. Then she came around the desk and hugged her so tightly that Seren could feel the woman's heart beating against her own. They did not stay long. Seren did not want to make a scene. But as they walked out the door, Noah tugged on her hand. "Mommy." "Yes, baby. Is this where you used to give your blood?" "Yes." "And somebody took your blood and put it in a sick person and made them better." "That is right." Noah nodded seriously, the way she nodded when she was thinking about something important. "So really, your blood saved somebody's life." Seren looked down at her daughter, at the dark hair, the wide, curious eyes, the face that was half Brennan and half herself, and entirely its own. "I suppose it did. And then that person helped us?" "Yes." Noah was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that made Serene's heart feel 3 sizes too large for her chest. "So the good thing you did came back to you. That means we should keep doing good things, because maybe they come back to other people too. Like a circle." Seren crouched down so she was eye level with her daughter. "That is exactly right. Like a circle." Noah grinned, the kind of grin that had been missing for so long and had slowly returned over the past 6 months, one smile at a time. "Can we get ice cream?" Seren laughed. "We can absolutely get ice cream." They walked down Morrow Avenue, past the laundromat that was still closed, past the dollar store that still smelled of plastic, past the bus stop bench that still had a missing slat. But the street did not feel the same. The cracks in the sidewalk did not seem as deep. The flickering streetlights did not seem as dark. Because the street had not changed. But Seren had. She had an apartment that was paid for. A job offer from a hospital across the city that had reviewed her case and decided she was exactly the kind of person they wanted on their team, a daughter who was healthy. A future that was no longer a question mark. And she had a card in her wallet. Plain white. A phone number in simple black letters. She had not called it in 3 months. She had not needed to, but she kept it anyway. Not as a lifeline, as a reminder that someone had seen her, that someone had not looked away. 2 blocks from the donor center, a dark car idled at the curb. Inside, Cormac Brannigan watched a woman and a small girl walk toward the ice cream shop on the corner. He watched the girl skip ahead. He watched the mother catch up and take her hand. He watched them disappear through the door, the bell above it ringing once before falling silent. Devlin sat in the driver's seat, patient as always. "Anything else, sir?" Cormac was quiet for a moment. His eyes stayed on the ice cream shop, on the window where he could see the girl pointing at the display case, on the mother bending down to hear what she was saying. "No, we are done." Devlin put the car in drive. As they pulled away, Cormac did not look back. He did not need to. He had spent 42 years carrying the weight of a promise he had made to a boy who hid in a tenement apartment and watched his mother disappear one donation at a time. The weight was not gone. It would never be gone. But it was lighter now. Because somewhere on Morrow Avenue, a woman who had given the only thing she had left was no longer giving alone. A girl who had asked if her mother would disappear was no longer afraid of the answer. And a circle that had started in a vinyl chair in a fluorescent-lit room had finally come around to where it began. Not with blood, with something that cost more. and was worth infinitely more. The choice to see someone, the choice to stop, the choice to say, I will not look away. Cormac watched the streets of Dunhaven pass by the window. The old brick buildings, the faded storefronts, the people walking with their heads down, carrying weights that no one could see. He could not help all of them. He knew that. The world was full of people drowning in silence, and no single person, no matter how much power they had, could pull them all to shore. But he could help one, and one was enough. One was always enough. The car turned onto the highway. The city fell away behind them. And somewhere in a small ice cream shop on the corner of Morrow and 10th, a girl named Noah pressed her face against the glass display case and pointed at the flavor with the most chocolate chips. Her mother smiled and said yes. And outside, the April sun kept shining on a street that had once felt forgotten, but no longer did.